Shalom. My name is Dilnaz Waraj, and I'm the MCC Interfaith and Outreach Committee Chair. On behalf of the Muslim Community Center, I welcome all of you, especially on this very cold, wintry evening. I appreciate it. I think when you pulled in here, it said 11 degrees, and when you leave today around 9, it might be around -4. So, yeah. But you guys are resilient, you're here. Those other, not so tough people are sitting at home in front of their fireplace, watching some silly TV. But so today, it was really important for us to have this conversation because our Interfaith and Outreach Committee gets together every month, and we always think about impactful topics, timely topics, and we thought about how during the 80s, we talk about the war on drugs, war on poverty, war on terrorism, and that really kind of weaves a thread of institutionalized racism in America, and it helps us understand it's really war on blacks, war on Latinos, and war on Muslims. And how do we have that conversation today in small groups and really also thread our faith and how our faith drives us and how our faith gives us hope. So today's conversation is really embedded in how we move forward with hope and faith, and then how we also move forward with action items and what are we going to do once we leave tonight. Together we're much stronger and we're collectively working towards a better America. So on your table, you have something called Coming Together, Celebrating Muslim American Cultures. If you could just look at that booklet. This was a deep dive into cultural competency of the Muslim American cultures. So the Niles Township took 6 months of really investigating the Muslim American cultures. So between Sunday, which was our opening ceremony, and we had 1,600 people show up at Niles West, to April 7th, we have a total of 50 events. We'd really like you to come to at least a few of the events and understand how the Muslim American culture does various things. Like there's Turkish coffee making, there's henna art, there's a book discussion on the Muslim girl, there's a adult discussion on Islam and the 5 pillars of Islam. So there's lots of various items depending on your interests. So please keep this at your kitchen table and figure out what you and your family want to do from now until April 7th. There's also a survey at your table which is called Celebrating Muslim American Culture. So in your booklet today it talks about tonight's event. So they just want a survey of what did you think about tonight's event. So if you could just take time and fill that survey out as well. We talked about how this is embedded in our faith and how important it is to use our faith to move things forward. And I just wanted to use a story from the prophet, peace be upon him, a parable, and it states, "The parable of the believers in their affection, mercy, and compassion for each other is that of a body. When a limb aches, the whole body reacts with sleeplessness and fever." That's a hadith from the prophet, and that's how we feel about what's happening in Chicagoland. So we're going to continue our evening today with a Quranic recitation by Imam Muhammad Aslam, who is from the Quranic Institute. He's a Quranic Institute coordinator for the Islamic Society of the Midwest, and he also serves as the Imam of the Turkish American Society. So Imam Muhammad.
Peace be upon you all. It is such a privilege to be here tonight, inshallah, God willing. I'm going to recite 2 verses of the Quran. They are very unique verses. One is about justice, the other one is about welcoming, knowing one another, appreciating one another, piety, and being conscientious of God. The first one, God says in chapter 4:35, "O you who believe, be upholders and standard bearers of justice, bearing witness to the truth for God's sake, even though it be against your own selves, your own desires, or parents or relatives, whether the person concerned be rich or poor, God is nearer to them. So do not follow your own desires, lest you swerve from justice. If you distort the truth or decline to bear witness, then know that God is fully aware of all that you do. The second one, in chapter 49, verse 13, O humankind, surely we have created you from a male and female, and made you into tribes and nations, so that you may know one another, and so build mutual and supportive relationships, not so that you may take pride in your differences of race or social rank, or breed hostility. Surely, the noblest, most honorable of you in God's sight is the one best in piety, righteousness, conscientiousness, and reverence for God. Surely, God is all-knowing and all-aware. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كونوا قوامين بالقسط شهداء لله ولو على أنفسكم أو الوالدين والأقربين إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا فالله أولى بهما فلا تتبعوا الهوى أن تعدلوا وإن تلهوا أو تعرضوا فإن الله كان بما تعملون خبيرا. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. Sadaqallahul Azim. God Almighty speaks the truth. Thank you.
WBEZ criminal justice reporter up, and she will be moderating for the rest of the evening. She also reports on mental health, poverty, labor, and climate change. So Shannon, please run the rest of the evening.
All right. Thank you so much. I really appreciate how Dinaz framed this evening that we're talking about gun violence, but it's about these larger systemic issues that we'll be looking at. And in order to get at issues that big, you have to hear from a lot of different perspectives, from a multitude of places. So throughout the night, you're going to be hearing from a lot of different people, and we're also going to be inviting you to participate in a few moments and draw upon your own wisdom and insight into the situation. So a lot to cover. So I don't want to hesitate at all and jump right into hearing from some of our speakers. We're going to start off by hearing from 3 people from different faith backgrounds about how their faith informs how they approach this topic and how they look at this topic. We're going to hear from Shumar Hempel. Shumar was born in Chicago. He's the senior community organizer at the Inner City Muslim Action Network and will be talking to us from an Islamic perspective. We're going to hear from Tamar Munasa. She is a rabbinical student and a lifelong Chicagoan. Growing up in Inglewood, she started the nonprofit organization Mothers and Men Against Senseless Killings, which also you may have heard called MASK. And we'll be hearing from Daniel Ruin on Christian text and community. He's been working as a pastor at Grace Lutheran in Evanston since 2007, and he's gonna kick us off.
Yeah.
Of course.
It's
Great honor to be with you this evening. I was born in the South Bronx in 1970, and before you all run out of here screaming in fear, no, I'm not going to tell you my whole life story, don't worry. But in 1970, the South Bronx was consistently listed as the worst neighborhood in the United States. My father was a pastor to a small Lutheran church there in the barrio. We were part of a congregation of Puerto Rican and African-American Lutheran Christians, and we were holding on to one another in great hope there in the early 70s. My parents were robbed several times while we were living in the South Bronx. Our house was the parish house. It was right next to the church. And over the years, my parents have told and retold us children all the stories of fear and joy that came from being part of this struggling community in New York City. And we always asked them when we were kids, tell us the story again on when you were robbed, because it was always the most thrilling. But one story always stood out. One night, when both my parents were asleep with me and my older sister in the next room as little babies, a burglar got into the house and he'd snuck his way into our parents' bedroom. He was opening my mother's cheap jewelry box on their dresser when my father, he started awake in bed. And the thief realized something was wrong, so he went low to the floor, tried to sneak out of the bedroom. My father was filled in that moment with fear and rage. He was afraid for his little babies, for me and my sister. He was afraid for his wife and for himself. But remember this, he was a Lutheran pastor. He was committed to the way of Jesus in terms of peacemaking. He worked closely with the gangs in the South Bronx. He was a local leader for reconciliation between all peoples in the ghetto. Here was this Norwegian Lutheran pietist, far, far away from the rolling hills of Minnesota. He was regularly questioned and criticized for his choices to put himself and his family at risk. My father worked with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. He was a disciple of Martin Luther King's teachings on Christian nonviolence. He was prepared to die there in the ghetto for the ministry of Jesus' love and justice and to bring the gospel of peace to the world. But in that moment, he could only react using the very thing he was fighting against. He grabbed an old Civil War bayonet that he kept underneath the bed, and he screamed as he chased the burglar out the door. He was still in his pajamas. He was still filled with anger and fear. But he was not content to simply clear the thief out of the house. No, he gave chase down dark 140th Street there in the Bronx with a bayonet in his hand. He ran after the burglar, who was now running for his life. And the way my father tells it, every time he got close enough to the thief to catch him or do any kind of violence to him, he tripped and fell. And then he would get back up. He'd give chase again. And then this happened 3 times. He'd fall, and then get up and fall again. My poor mother was waiting outside for what must have seemed like forever when my father, after 20 or 30 minutes, came staggering back to their house, his pajamas torn, his knees all bloody, with this Civil War bayonet still in his hands. And the thief was never caught. My mom and dad continued to do their ministry in the South Bronx for the next 4 years. And to this day, that Civil War bayonet, it hangs in our basement. And it fascinated me as a child, that long knife hanging on the wall there, this relic of such horrendous outpouring of violence from our country's history. But I was also attracted to the power that that knife represented, as I imagined my father running headlong with it in a desperate attempt to secure the safety of his family. I'm telling you this story to get at the root of 2 things. One, what is, in my opinion, a primary root of gun violence in our culture. A deep and gnarled root that begs for a kind of joyful confrontation, and 2, amidst all the other things that we cannot control when it comes to gun violence, I want to offer something that we absolutely can control. When President Dwight D. Eisenhower gave his farewell speech from the White House in 1961, he used the now infamous expression, the military-industrial complex, and he explained the following. Every gun that is made, Eisenhower told his listeners, every warship launched, every rocket fired, signifies, in the final sense, a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. Any nation that pours its treasure into the purchase of armaments is spending more than mere money, said Eisenhower. It's spending the sweat of its laborers, the genius of its scientists, and hopes of its children. Of course, since 1961, the military-industrial complex has grown into such a large and imposing force that one cannot even fathom its size, its influence, its impenetrability. And it brings me back to that Civil War bayonet in my parents' basement, because it too was a product of the military-industrial complex. That old bayonet was a weapon from the Civil War that kept its potential violent efficacy all the way into the early 1970s. To be used on the streets by a scared father who would have done who knows what with it, if only he hadn't kept falling down. All the guns, as we know, they come from the military-industrial complex. The ethos, the worldview, the way we talk about defense spending rather than war spending is the root of so much of our current crisis in our streets. We think we're powerless to stop gun violence on the streets. How about facing the ultimate Death Star of its wicked parent, the military-industrial complex? How can we possibly stop that? And here's where I must invoke the name of Jesus, peace be upon him, and the name of Moses, peace be upon him, and the name of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. For all, in one way or another, faced a military-industrial complex in their time. Amen? What must have seemed like an unbeatable worldview of greed and power and fear. They all led a small band of believers who, relying on the higher power of God, utterly transformed their world. That place of stubborn hope and wild joy is not only the place I want to live, it is the place that I live, because I believe I'm living it here right now with all of you. We're gathered to remind ourselves of the great power of God to enact such works of peace and justice, and to enact them out of an assembly so small and tender. We only need to keep telling our sacred stories, and to be open to new stories of cooperation and organization and courage. And once we can open our spiritual eyes, then maybe we will see this small, powerful garden growing all around us. Here tonight is one such garden in the city of despair. And there are others worth tending. I'm a coordinator of the Northside Poor People's Campaign, an initiative that follows in the footsteps of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King's final legacy. Before he was assassinated, he identified the three-headed hydra of American sin: poverty, racism, and the war economy. The Reverend William J. Barber and the Reverend Dr. Liz Theo Harris have organized a new Poor People's Campaign in 35 states since last year. And starting on Mother's Day, we will mobilize as many as 1,000 people in Illinois to commit to 40 days of peaceful, nonviolent civil disobedience addressing racism, poverty, the war economy, and environmental degradation. Can you imagine that small garden growing into 35,000 people around the country acting together, joyfully confronting the military-industrial complex, with so many combat veterans and current and former gang members and clergy and mothers and children and men and union members and office workers, all crying out with our bodies and our songs and our spirits? We call for a moral revival of our culture in the name of love. We call for a moral revival of our culture in the name of God. We call for a moral revival of our culture in the name of our elders and our children and their children. And we'll stand on the shoulders of so many who have come before us and dare to look just a little farther than they, to address what everyone says cannot and should not be addressed, the very roots of gun violence and racism and poverty in this country that we love and call home. We are going to confront the military-industrial complex. If you'd like more info about the Poor People's Campaign, I have flyers. You can see me after the program. But before I go, I just have to conjure up my father one more time. As I said, I told you that opening story for two reasons. One was to describe and confront what I believe is the root of gun violence in our nation, the military-industrial complex. And the other was to focus on something we actually have complete control over, which is our own spiritual existence. You see, my father's story, I think, should humble and convict everyone in this room. Because if a Lutheran pastor, dedicated as he was to the precepts of Jesus' teachings and the work of nonviolence, could become a terrified, furious, bayonet-wielding fanatic, then any of us here can as well. Tell the truth. Join with me in the truth. For as Jesus says, if you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. The roots of gun violence are not just in the military-industrial complex. They're not just in the illegal sales across the Indiana border. No, the roots of gun violence are here. They're here. They're in all of us. The roots of gun violence are in our own hearts. What coming together tonight does is that it begins to break down the human sin of division and distrust. It brings us across our religious traditions and geographies and class distinctions and languages. It's an opportunity for connection, for solidarity, and for a spiritual transformation of our hearts. We are all scared. We are all traumatized, all abused. We are all angry. We're all in despair, and we are terrified for the continuing effects of such violence all around us. But God's love and God's presence and God's power is waiting for us all to lay it down, to realize that if we wish to change the violence of our neighborhoods and our nation, we must first allow God to embrace and transform the violence in our own hearts. And so this moment, this experience, is a gateway opportunity for us to realize we have complete control over our own spiritual work as we lean upon God to lead us. And we can do both external and internal activism to make a change with God's help. Life, as with activism, is not a zero-sum game. I proclaim that God's power is big enough and dynamic enough and loving enough to allow for many paths and many moments to combine into a solution for our shared future, a future, as the prophet Jeremiah declared, a future filled with hope. Thank you, and God bless you.
You're really good. I thought that I was supposed to go first, and I was like, no, I can't go first. I'm going to be too nervous. And now, thanks, Pastor. I appreciate it. You know, as I sat there listening to you, I couldn't help but thinking, your dad, a minister in the South Bronx, sounds a lot like my mother, a single mom from Inglewood. Only without the bayonet. She had a butcher knife. So the story was a little different. But your father was pretty gangster. I just want to let you know.
I'll tell him.
You tell him I said that.
But I don't want to encourage him either now.
No, it's okay. It's in him. Like he said, it's in his heart. It's okay. It's okay. My name is Tamar Manasseh, and Shannon asked me before I came up, how would I like to be introduced? Because she'd heard that I was a rabbinic student, and well, I haven't been a rabbinic student for quite some time now. I should have graduated many years ago. I'm not a slacker or a super senior. I'm just a woman. And in my community, they haven't begun to ordain women just yet. And since I'm the kind of girl that doesn't really like no or being denied anything, I'm kind of just gonna hold on until they change their minds. That's kind of what I'm doing. So I started the academy about 10 years ago. And at the time I started at the academy, I had my daughter was just being bat mitzvah, so she was 12. And that made my son 10. And my daughter had an affinity for Torah, and she was great at it. She loved learning, she loved the language, she loved her Judaism. She loved it. She was a lot like me. She was such a smart girl, and she couldn't cook at all. And the thing about girls in my temple, we weren't encouraged to learn Torah or to chant or to do any of that. We were taught to bake chicken. That's what we did. We prepared for Oneg. We learned to sew, and we learned to birth babies, and we learned to do stuff like that. We learned to be mothers. We learned to be wives. We didn't learn to be leaders and teachers. We weren't taught that. Even though the men could often say, hey, you know, women can be the teachers in our community. And you are your children's first teacher. Of course you are. But you won't be my rabbi. Yeah, I'll wait on it. I bet I can wait him out. So I got involved in the academy because it was what my life just led up to. It was what I was supposed to do. I grew up in Inglewood, and I went to Jewish day school. As you probably know, that not many of my neighbors were my classmates. As a matter of fact, none of them were. No one in Inglewood was, as a matter of fact. And so every day I would traverse these two worlds. I would go on one side of Chicago and the other side. To the one city of Chicago to the other city of Chicago every single day. And people in Hyde Park could not imagine how people in Inglewood lived, and people in Inglewood could not imagine how people in Hyde Park lived. And this was my life every single day. And so what I learned how to do, for most of my life, I was somewhere interstitially. I was in between the parts. I lived that way. And so I was never really either. I was a lot like Moses. I'm pretty sure he was a Pisces. You know, he never really was an Egyptian, and the Israelites didn't like him so much. And my thing was, I was always a Jew, but I was black. And then I was always black, but you can't be a Jew. So what I learned to do was be on the outside of both of those houses, sometimes looking in. Both of them had great big holes in the roof. They didn't see it, but I did. And just as the black community had issues, so did the Jewish community. And my reason for being who I was, it was because I was from Inglewood. Because I had to be able to see the world that way. Because one day, I was going to be standing here talking to you about gun violence. One day, I needed to be able to explain gun violence in a way that nobody else could. I need to be able to see it and live it in a way that no one else could, in a way that was totally unique. I talk about tikkun olam all the time, the principle of repairing the world. The idea that when the earth was created, when God created the world, that his glory was too much and it cracked the vessel. And it is the obligation of every Jew to attempt to repair the world. You might not make it, you might not do it, but you have to at least begin the work of trying to repair the world. And so as a Jew, you grow up seeing problems in the world as cracks, and not as these huge, insurmountable, unovercomable problems. They're just cracks. And the same way you wouldn't move out of that house with the hole in the roof, you would fix it, you fix these cracks. That's what you do. So gun violence for me was more like a crack. It wasn't this problem that was impossible to be fixed, like so many in the black community have been convinced that it is. Tricked into believing that it is. So my daughter was 15. No, she was 16. And I tell this story all the time. My daughter is probably one of the most self-absorbed people that I know. But then again, what teenage girl is not? And one day my daughter called me, and I was on my way to the nail salon, and I had to turn off because it was a body in the middle of the street at 51st and King Drive, not far from our house. And I remember being inconvenienced because traffic was rerouted and I was going to have to pay an extra $10 because I was going to be late. And I got to the nail shop and I'm sitting there and I'm talking with my friend, and my daughter calls her, she's crying. And she says, "Mommy, my friend got killed. And you need to do something about this." Well, I mean, I am pretty good at this whole momming thing. But how do I fix gun violence? But she went further. She told me that yesterday he was waiting at the bus stop with me when I was on my way to work. And all I could think about was, what if yesterday was today, and what if my daughter was there with him? My Jewish daughter, who had been my bat mitzvah, who was the Chidon Hatanah scholar, she would have been gone because she's a black girl. Because the world sees her as a black girl. And even more terrifying for me, I have a black boy at home too. And he was bar mitzvahed and he was circumcised on the 8th day. He was all of those things. He's a Jew. That is not what the world sees. And so, what do? I mean, my kids are 19 and 21. When I started Mass, they were 17 and 20. 17 and, no, 20, yeah, 19, 17 and 19. And my daughter, the social butterfly, she has friends like any kid should get to have. My son, not so much. Because right now, at 19, my son is telling me I don't want to get a driver's license because I don't want to have to get stopped by the police. I don't know if I'm going to make it out of that. What 19-year-old do you know that doesn't want to drive? And he's really handsome, so he really should be driving, but no, he doesn't want to because he doesn't want to have an interaction with the Chicago Police Department because he may not make it out. My daughter has friends, and I mean, I can't handcuff them to the radiator. I can't lock them in the house. I can't do these things. And so if I can't keep my kids in my house, and I can control what happens in my house, I had to learn to make the world that they were going out into a better place. because that's what real helicopter moms do. So what else could I do but get out there in the trenches with them? Because people believe that these war zones are in Afghanistan, they're in North Africa, they are North Korea, South Korea. These are far, far away places, but they are not. They are right outside of our doors every day. Every day we send our kids out of the house. We have no guarantees that they are going to come back home, that we aren't going to get those phone calls. Black mothers are a lot like those mothers from Exodus. There will be no deliverer coming out of our community because they will all be dead. You have a baby boy and you just don't know how to protect him. So many mothers give up. They give up. They almost abandon their sons emotionally because you got to let them go. Because what can I do to save him? And it's going to really hurt me when I lose him, and there's nothing else I can do to save him. I can't keep him here. And you can only imagine what that would do to a teenage boy, having his mother emotionally divorce herself from him. I've seen this happen. This is a reality. And it has nothing to do with them being bad mothers. It's a coping mechanism. And when you've lost so many nephews and you sat on the front row and you've watched your friends go through it, you've watched your sister go through it, you've watched your cousins go through it, why wouldn't you go through it? What's so special about you? Nothing. It's a hard world for mothers in Inglewood. It's a hard world for mothers in Lawndale and Roseland. In places all across this country, it's a hard world for mothers who look like me. And it's not just mothers that look like me anymore. It can be any mother. It's been so many mothers. It doesn't even have a face anymore. And the thing was about me being Jewish was, it wasn't an option for me to say, no, I can't get involved. No, it's nothing I can do about that because Judaism teaches you, yes it is. You may not solve the problem, but you definitely better get out there and try. And that is what I do when I sit on the corner every single day in the summer. Every day. I sit on the corner and I make sure kids eat, and I make sure they have a safe place to play, and I make sure they know that they are loved. That mothers love them more than anyone does. Fathers love them more than anyone does. People ask me about gang problems. Who is the gang in our neighborhood? I think we're the gang in our neighborhood. Because it's about love and it's about family. And that's what we've given them. So all of the places that we see deficiencies in our community, we fill those gaps. And that's what Judaism teaches you have to do. And if you're going to be, people often talk about this whole conversation about real Jews, about black Jews, about white Jews, blah, 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 blah. A good Jew is a Jew that does the work. The real Jew is the Jew that does the work. It doesn't matter what you look like or where you come from. Do you do the work? That's what matters. And so I'm so honored to be invited here tonight to tell this story, because any room that I can get in and tell a story like the one I'm telling is a great thing, because more people need to hear about what's going on. Right now, we are trying to raise $1.5 million because they are closing every high school, every public high school in Inglewood. And we all know that gun violence is not something that can be legislated. It has to be, you have to educate communities out of this. The guns, if you can't take the guns, you have to change the minds of the people with the guns. You have to change the attitudes toward guns. And we can do that in classrooms, but if there are no classrooms to go to, then what do you do? What do you have? So the work is great. And it's really wonderful to see people in this room who are willing to do that work. People in this room who dedicate their lives to doing this work. It's good to know that you're not in the trenches alone. So I'm going to pass it off to whoever's next, because I can do this all night long.
Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings, greetings to everyone, again, speakers. I am honored to be here, to be amongst you all. It was a good trek from the south side. Some traffic, right, but it's worth it, right, to be with you all in the room. On something that I've really been reflecting on over the past 48 hours. That really made me harken back to 1994 of an 11-year-old made, I think, national headlines, who struck the cover of Time magazine, and then caught the eye of a man named Tupac Shakur. And this young man by the name of Robert Yummy Sandifer was known, historically, known as a demon 11-year-old child who was known for killing gang members. He was known for an accidental murder of shooting a young lady. And you know, they would talk about this young man, this young brother was a demon, man. I'm telling you, when people saw him, they ran. They got out of Dodge. And in this neighborhood, it was in the neighborhood of Roseland, as Tamar mentioned, in the Wild Hundreds on the south side, as it's known for. And this young brother was told to be shot to death execution style by two of his friends who was 16 and 14. To get rid of him because he was causing so much heat in the neighborhood. And when you think about this young brother losing his life to gang violence, I immediately started to reflect on the fact that today, in this time, he would be 34 years old. I'm 36. What was the conditions that produced a Yummy Sandifer? What was the household conditions that he came from? And then I started to reflect on my own conditions. The fact that I grew up in the same similar circumstances where you had the grandmother, you had the single mother, you had your brothers and sisters, large families, and you had tribal warfare that existed, right? Which was called gangs. And when I reflect on his life, I think about how blessed and lucky I am to have both beautiful people, like my mother, who I believe was probably the best person I've ever known because she was such a strong woman, to raise a single family, to deal with issues with dignity, that taught me to deal with the issues with dignity. And then I started to think about, you know, what if this young brother really had a moral compass, a spiritual compass, something that he can really look to that begins to reconcile the heart. And, you know, it made me reflect on a personal verse that I love dearly, to always reflect on and go back to, is that in our book, you know, chapter 49, verse 10, God says, the believers are but a single family, so make peace and reconciliation between your brothers and sisters, and fear God, and that you may receive mercy. And then I started to reflect on that verse in that chapter, and I started to think about the time that our Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, went to Medina to reconcile the two tribes that were warring at the time, the Aus and the Khazraj. And they said, yeah, prophet of God, if you can deal with this war, if you can deal with the issues that we're having, this tribal warfare, and you can bring us together, we will follow you. We're not, you know, it wasn't that they needed rituals, they needed to hear something, they needed to hear the word that would move their spirit. They really looked at the prophet and really wanted to understand, man, if you can bring us together to make us one people, we'll follow you. And he was able to do that. He was able to bring these tribes together, and they was the Ansar, the helpers, right, of reconciling what would be warfare. And then I started to think about the work that I moved in around, man, who will be the reconcilers when you think about the tragedies that happen in our city, the warfare that's taking place. When you think about, you know, individuals who are dealing with issues of structural violence every day, bad schooling, no real food options, right? Lack of food access, right? You think about the lack of dignified housing. And for me, it was always, man, what role can I play to help reconcile the hearts of individuals who are looking for a different lens? Someone who can begin to see the world through a different prism. Because for me, it was Islam. For me, it was this notion of getting to know your brothers and sisters, right? The idea of stories. I'm a community organizer. So this idea of stories to getting to know one another, to begin to know your stake. How do we begin to really create these spaces? And so for me, becoming Muslim, one of the things that I did immediately was not only gain the spiritual aspect of being able to develop myself and have a moral compass, but we started to venture out to different communities, right? This was around the time I was 18, 19, and we were able to go to different communities in the suburbs across the city, and you were able to see different spaces and cultures. And for me, I never relished in the differences or how communities didn't connect to me being a black man from that came from the South Side of Chicago. I was always looking for the spaces of, man, what through their experiences connects to my own experiences, right? Because the prophet was able to deal with those things. He was able to deal with the messiness that bringing people together was not an easy thing. See, we talk about it a lot of times, we hear stories, but bringing people and connecting us closer to understand our stake at a larger level, to be able to deal with something like violence, even though you may not directly be affected by it. How are we able to mend our hearts to begin to see people who live in these communities as human beings? There's three brothers that I want to recognize right now. If I can ask Raphael, Mustafa, and Nasir to stand up for me, please. Give these brothers a round of applause. These three brothers right here, and I'm not trying to put y'all on Front Street, but these three brothers right here, man, have been doing amazing things with the organization. But the reality is, when I look at three brothers like this, who I've gotten a chance to really work with closely over the years, who've dealt with violence directly themselves, I think about that reconciliation. I mean, these brothers on the front line, helping us in 2016, bringing together over 1,500 people, 2,000 people, 50 years from the same park that Martin Luther King marched through, bringing together different faith backgrounds, communities, really doing the work to memorialize Dr. King as Muslims, to understand how that legacy speaks to us, right? When I'm standing in this vein of reconciliation, when I think about the fact that young men who are in our program, right, in one of our programs, who in the population of 18 to 25 are coming from the 15 communities, they're coming from Inglewood, they're coming from Roseland, they're coming from these different places on the west side, that's helping to drive violence. And I think about the fact that they are there to try to see the world through a different lens at a Muslim-led organization, to be able to understand, man, how does spirituality play a role in allowing me to see something else, that I don't have to allow violence to be a part of that reality, right? Our communities, our faith communities, have a much deeper role to play outside of the notion of just coming in to try to help and talk to people. We have, first and foremost, the responsibility of showing people a whole nother way out. When I think about the work that we're doing collectively, that I've been able to engage in collectively, that with pastors who I call my pastor, when we're working on legislation to pass to alleviate some of the pressures in these neighborhoods, I always say, man, this is a win for our faith community, right? When a pizza delivery guy who's been working in the community for 20 years gets shot and killed in the middle of a crossfire on one of the very same blocks that we had to occupy. And I see that we were able to come together with the father from St. Rita's Parish across the street, with the Jewish rabbi from the synagogue that was right down the street, come together, bring our institutions, and we did all of our prayers in the same spot where the victim was shot. And then we collected money together collectively for the family, to be able to know that the type of support, that you don't have to be afraid to live in your own neighborhood. You don't have to be afraid of your neighbors. You don't have to be afraid. But the reason why they were able to see a different lens is because our faith was in practice. We didn't sit and proselytize. We didn't tell people what they're doing is wrong, right? And so, I want to talk about this issue from a different lens, to the fact that, man, we have to begin to create spaces where brothers and sisters can reconcile, that we can bring people together in a way that gives them a whole new vision. And I believe that our faith as Muslims, when I think about the characteristics of our prophet, that's what drives me to do the work that I'm doing. The fact that, you know, I was just telling Tamar that, you know, we were, you know, I laugh because even after the 9 to 5, I found myself up to midnight, you know, with giants, with lawyers who are part of our base, working on cases for brothers who are in our programs. This is midnight. We're going back and forth trying to figure out cases. That's how much the work entails. And you got to say to yourself, man, what only drives you to do this? It has to be a spiritual compass. If it was just based on the issue, I think I would have left a long time ago. You know, many nights I woke up, many nights I was going to sleep saying, man, I'm done. I can't do this. I can't do this. This is too much. The only thing that will propel me to move forward is the spiritual fortitude. It is coming in contact with different faith communities that's helping to renew my own faith, to understand, man, how are we the healers? What role are we playing? And the fact that brothers, young brothers especially, when I talk about in these neighborhoods, that we don't have to have a Yomi Sandiford reality. We don't have to have that. That we know that these brothers feel like that they have spaces to really reinvigorate their lives. And then at the same time, when they come to Iman, they're looking at the fact that it's Muslims that's doing this. It's Muslims. So anything that I've looked at on the news or that I read about, we defame that by the actions in which we carry. So I leave you all to begin to think about one thing. I'm not going to come up here and tell you about all the gruesome stats and all of the bad things that happen in these neighborhoods. I want to challenge you all to begin to understand who are the healers, who are the people that bring tribes together, right? To become one people. That they can earn the favor of God and that we can get the mercy that in which we all want in all of our communities to make them safe. So I thank you all tonight. Assalamu alaikum, peace and blessings. Thank you.
Our speakers for giving us something to think about. We are going to have some time for you to have questions and answers for the folks you heard speak, but they are starting prayer right above us, and this microphone's quite loud. So before we get to the question and answers, we're actually going to take a pause here for about 15 minutes and invite you all to have small group discussions at your table. You'll find on each table there's these little slips of paper with 2 question prompts on them. There's one per table. The 2 prompts are, what's one thing you've seen on the issue of violence that gives you hope? And the second is there anything in your own spiritual beliefs that you draw upon for guidance on how we as community members can do something to address violence in Chicagoland? I do invite folks to be thoughtful as you're having these group conversations. If you find yourself talking a lot, maybe sit back a little bit and ask a question of your neighbor. And if you're finding yourself not speaking up a lot, maybe take that step and push yourself to say something, because we'd really like to create an environment where we're hearing from everybody at the table. So I'll be back in just about 15 minutes. You both performed.
Right, yeah.
I'll do my best to
Part of a larger effort to really yeah, I'm gonna fuss to get to the proper, that's right? So think for me, like New York is always like, because I think we prisons.
Yeah. We are high here. Definitely. Well, prepare.
The fact that they're trying to change it, we've lost some brothers here. They were given this.
Don't encourage her. She gotta sing the ABCD song.
All right. So bringing it back here, I'm going to invite the speakers back up to stage to sit up here. And I'm going to invite all of you to think of some questions you'd like to pose to them. And there is a microphone over here. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and wait a second till the microphone can get to you to make sure that everybody can hear what you're asking. You do, while you're thinking for a question. Maybe while you all are percolating on that, I'll throw out a question to the three of you. What's something you've seen from somebody else in the community that they've done, that you've seen make a difference, that you've seen make a dent on this issue of gun violence? And I'll pass along the microphone to whoever feels inspired to answer that.
It's only because I sat closest to you, isn't it?
Sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. I've been here before. There are so many things that I've seen, that has really shown us that we're making an impact on our block. First of all, we've had the sharpest drop in gun-related violence of any census tract in the city that's not being gentrified. So that means no additional resources are going into the neighborhood, but some kind of way, the level of gun violence is coming down and the neighborhood school is actually improving. So it must be a correlation between the three. Something is happening there. So we're just gonna keep doing it because one can't pinpoint exactly what the one thing is. So we're just gonna keep doing everything that we do. But we've seen young people actually intervene with other young people in very violent situations. And it's been times when guns have come out and one guy will tell another guy, hey, no, we don't do that over here anymore. So why don't you do it over here anymore? It's really, okay, it's still terrible that guns came out, but the fact that one young person can tell another one, we don't do that here anymore. Anymore since when? Anymore since the neighborhood changed. When you give people respect and you treat people like human beings, the darndest thing happens. They behave like human beings. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to kill. It's not fun. And so when you give kids options, when you give them an out, they will take it. So we've seen a lot of that, and I'm really, really proud that, nobody is, sometimes you get a thank you, but how often do kids really thank mothers for anything? Never. But the thank you is, we've been to far more graduations than we have funerals. That's the thank you.
Questions from other folks out there? See one back there.
Thank you. So I'd like to actually turn the question on the table around to the panelists, right? So the first question, I want to hear each of you talk about this because I think it's important. And I'm actually going to start with the second one because we didn't have an opportunity to talk about the second one at our table. I'm very interested. Is there anything in your own spiritual beliefs that you draw upon for guidance for how we as a community, as community members, can do something to address violence in Chicagoland? So please, if you could each just kind of reflect on that question.
We at our table, we checked it off and we were talking about the first one, right? So we got it done. So we were talking about our own spiritual traditions. But actually, as you bring the question, what's your name, sir? What's your first name? Omar. Thank you. I'm a member of an organization called the Community Renewal Society, which is 70 plus member congregations around the metro area. It's all different denominations of Christians, and we're organized to address institutional racism and poverty, and thereby also violence. So we have many different organizers who've addressed issues, whether it's gun violence or poverty, prison reform. And for years, and I know probably some of you here have been involved in this, we worked on the ceiling bill that was passed this last summer for nonviolent felons so that they don't have to check the box. And I know that the state of Illinois is behind in that, but those of us who've been on the ground for years fighting for that, when that news came through, we all gave such thanks and praise. And I would say that as a Christian organization, we had many events where we prayed and we quoted Jesus. But I actually think it was the message of Jesus calling us to reach outside of our own community. In other words, when Jesus would go outside of his own community and remind his own followers of the belovedness of all people, that when we cooperated with other groups on this bill, when we reached outside and worked with our Jewish sisters and brothers, or Muslim sisters and brothers, and ethical humanists, and everyone who had to come together to agitate and change the facts on the ground so that we could move that forward. I believe that if we are true to our own tradition, in the way I interpret mine, it will naturally send us outside our doors to cooperate with others to make changes on the ground to deal with these issues. It's just something off the top of my head.
I'm going to cheat look at the question. Okay, your own spiritual beliefs that you draw upon for guidance. I think, for me, man, I think it's, and I kind of talked about it, in my talk, this notion of stories. Because, there was a time in the Prophet Muhammad's life where it was the time of sadness. And he had just lost his uncle, a lot of events were taking place. And, God used stories from other prophets, right, to center him, to begin to refocus. And I think for me personally, having the pleasure to really work with a population of returning citizens, we have a Green Reentry program that has a workforce development component that focuses in on housing restoration, taking vacant properties and rehabbing them, and also training them in HVAC, and training them in carpentry, and training them in electric, and getting EPA certified. And when I think about these men who've already completed 8 projects, and I've had the opportunity to sit down and talk about how through those projects, they talked about gaining their humanity back, right? Getting their humanity back by seeing something that they participated in. And then when I think about one of the properties specifically, it was a property that was adjacent from a school, right on the corner, right next to a block where a man sits. And what it took to actually get that building, to get that 3-flat building, was unconventional. That through an ordinance at the city level that had never been done, nobody had ever used this ordinance, and we went down, with our Jewish congregation. We went down with Father Tony from the St. Rita's Parish. Went down with some of our community leaders from the Muslim community, and we showed up in court about 35 deep every time. When they would call the address for this building, we would all stand up. And so the judge stopped and paused and said, "I have never seen nothing like this ever. You all must be really serious about this space," right? Because again, this was a space that was terrorizing the block. It was making it hard for elementary school kids to go back and forth. And the fact of the matter is that these brothers helped to stabilize this block with a property that now is seen as one of the safest blocks in our 10-mile radius. It's something that is truly inspiring when I get to talk to those individuals who participated in that.
Well, I don't have any Jewish friends. I have a couple, but I'm just they're new. They're new. They're new. They're just coming in, right? And so when I decided that we had to do something, it was just, you know, there was this mother that was murdered on 74th and Stewart. She was breaking up a fight one night, got shot. So you can't say she was in the wrong place at the wrong time, because a mother breaking up a fight, I mean, that's kind of what mothers do. So we can't let mothers start believing that breaking up fights can get you killed. So that was kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me. It was time for me to do something. Everybody has their moment. That was my moment. And I tell this story all the time, and this is honestly how it went down. I got all my friends together. None of them are Jews. I am. I got them all drunk. And I was like, hey, we're gonna go sit on this corner tomorrow. And it was like, what? We're gonna do what? And I'm like, keep drinking. You're still asking questions. And so I got pink, we had these hot pink t-shirts, and we were gonna go sit on this corner across the street from where this woman had been murdered, right? And so, I mean, I still don't think any of them even understand why we did that, but they get it. It made sense. It makes sense. But we got some hot dogs. We went to sit on this corner in these hot pink t-shirts across the street from where a woman had been murdered 3 days before we got out there. And people in the neighborhood, young people, thought we were nuts. No. First they thought we were the police. That's what they thought first. Then they thought we were crazy. And then it was like, this one is running around asking for hugs. It's definitely something not right about these people. And we were giving away free food. Free hugs and free food. Everything was free, right? Nobody could understand why we were giving away anything for free, because no one gave away anything for free. Human, just random acts of kindness just did not exist to them, period. Because nobody did anything out of the kindness of their heart for people on 75th and Stewart, for people on 74th and Harvard. Nobody ever did anything like that. They'll be here for a day or two and then they're gone. That's what they thought. In 4 days, how badly starved the community was for love and attention. 4 days. Everybody, I knew everybody's name and everybody knew my name. I got so many hugs. I'm not even a touchy-feely, huggy, kissy person. But I hug 50 people every day because they needed that. And it was all based on the principle of Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh. All Israel for each other all the time. And the thing about that is, I learned that in the Jewish community. All Israel for each other all the time. Well, Israel didn't really need it, but black folks did. So what I did was, I took my Jewish teaching and my Jewish learning to the block. That's what I did. And now, that's what I give my friends. And that's what my friends give their friends. And that's what my friends' friends give their friends. That's how you pay it forward. That's how you build community. So it's not about talking to anybody about being a Jew. It's about showing them what being a Jew is about. And that's what I do. So that's how I brought my spiritual beliefs into my work. And that's what's made the difference.
Can I say something quick? Hey, can we give it up for her tomorrow? Not in a very cynical way. I mean, 75th and Stewart. I mean, she's being super humble, but 75th and Stewart was probably, at the time, I would say about 5-6 years ago, was one of the hottest spots in the city. And it was them who helped to subside the violence on that corner. So I want y'all to give it up to Tamar. Give it for Tamar.
Do we have any other questions out there? All right, I see one back there.
Hello, my name is Maxwell. I had a question. First of all, thank you guys for coming out. Pleasure to hear from you. I had a question about the use of the word gun violence. I guess rhetorically, in my own personal opinion, I understand that probably like 90 or 80% of the homicides in Chicago happen due to gun violence. But I wonder your opinion on the use of gun violence instead of just violence. It kind of makes it seem as if this is only a gun issue and not a violence issue. In my own thoughts, it kind of separates us to those who say, well, I'm for the gun, but against the violence. So if you tell me gun violence, then I'm I'm torn there because you're trying to take something away from me. So can you just speak to the use of the word gun violence, your personal thoughts, and so on and so forth about it?
Thank you for that question. I'm going to make you kick this one off. You haven't kicked one off yet.
Dude, that was a good one.
Wow, y'all actually gonna have me trying to come after that? I mean, that is a very philosophical question. The use of gun violence. Like, when I think about what you saying, when I hear it, what does it make me think, Maxwell?
I'm thinking more the usage of the word, the way the word functions, whether it be in the news or why I asked that is last week I had a protest, and when the news wrote about it, they said the community comes together against gun violence, but I never used the term gun violence, so it got me thinking, where is this term coming from? And I wanted to kind of hear, and then I'm seeing it being used, and it got me thinking, like, where is this gun violence coming from? Because I fight against violence as a whole.
Right.
So I just wanted to know your opinion on it. Do you think, how do you think that word is really being used? Because personally, I feel like it's slightly, tearing people, but just your opinions.
Well, I mean, I think in the context and community, I think when you frame it like that, I think about it from this notion of like how it racializes groups of people, right? So if the act of violence has anything to do with black folks, then it's gun violence, right? It's not structural violence. It doesn't have anything to do with, right, the war on nutrition, right? The fact that there's not enough nutrition in our communities. It doesn't talk about all the other environmental factors that are at play. But I think because we use gun violence in these communities, it's the simple fact that, I mean, let's be real, there are a lot of guns flowing through these communities, right? And I always use the analogy that, people on the south and west side, they can get guns more than they can get tomatoes, bananas, apples, right? They get access to guns because of the seamless flow of a particular place that it's coming from. Right, that how many guns are entering in our city. And I mean, even when you hear the guys talk about it, like, man, what they do? Did they just load a crate up and drop them off in each hood and then left? And so, I mean, and I was just talking with my friend about this, like, in America, I mean, it's so many guns that for every adult, you can average 6 guns for every adult, right? If you take each adult in America, we can have access to 6 guns. You know what I mean? And so, I mean, this notion that, man, I think people in our communities are not torn by the issue of gun violence because they use guns for protection. They see guns as protection, and they don't think about it from this fact of Second Amendment. They don't think about it as like this is a policy issue. This is politics at play. It's just the fact that I exist in a world that I'm protecting myself. And so I have to carry a gun, right? And that's the thing that gives me power. But I think in my world, Maxwell, man, that I think when I hear the term, it's automatically racialized because of the access of weapons that happens that folks get in these neighborhoods.
I think gun violence is kind of a dog whistle kind of thing, because the other day you heard about a shooting in Kentucky. In some kind of way, Sarah Sanders got up and said something about gangs in Chicago. The two have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah, we're always in it.
It's always when someone shot people at a concert in Las Vegas, some kind of way, magically, the gangbangers on the South Side had something to do with that. It always goes back to Chicago all the time. That's gun violence. Chicago is the epicenter of gun violence. That's because it's black folks here. That's what it's about. You hear about violence, but you want to talk about Chicago, it's gun violence. So it's all, I asked when you were asking your question, I asked my brother right here, how many black folks was at your rally? Because if they saw too many black people, that's why it was gun violence. Because everybody automatically assumes that it's gun violence, because it's a trap, because we are exposed to guns. You can get a gun from McDonald's on 55th and Wabash. Are you serious? You can get guns from the corner store, any of the corner stores pretty much, on the south side, maybe even on the west side. It's no secret where they come from, so everybody should have a gun. Why don't y'all all have guns? People don't understand it. If I say I don't want to conceal carry, I don't want to carry a gun because I believe in God. God has protected me this far, so hey, I don't need a gun. Are you crazy? You sit out on the corner every day. But the assumption is that all of us have guns, because how do you live in a place like that and survive if you don't have a gun? Because that's what keeps you safe, right? So that is the assumption. When people see us, especially people from the south and west sides of Chicago, they want to know, where's your gun? Where do you keep it at? That's what they want to know. That's how that works.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question for you, Maxwell. So I'm assuming you're an activist, yes?
That's correct.
So you mentioned how it might play with people who are probably white and are more coming at it from the Second Amendment issue, like to quote Shamar, you talk about policy. So will you address that? Because you brought that up. So is it that some of the work you're doing is that you're trying to get to that Second Amendment community to move the needle in terms of the issues that you're concerned about? Is that what you're asking about, the way it works, the way the term works?
Yeah. I guess it's because I was seeing it on the literature, on the website when I was, when I was coming here, and like you're saying, for me, we live in a pretty divided time, and personally, I try my best to tiptoe towards, the other's opinions and see how we can meet in the middle and see how we're saying the same thing just in a different language, and personally, I just feel that I was used in the news to use me to talk about an issue. And I just maybe want us to think about ways in which we use language and we're being manipulated politically to discuss things. And I just, was curious about that, and maybe a thought for anyone else, because for myself, once again, I'm against violence. And particularly for myself, and what I fight for is the innocence of children, the violence predicated on them. So when I look at violence, I don't look at it as, like you're saying, you're talking about a system, you're talking about housing, you're talking about education. That's what I look at as the structure. I look at the gun being at the end point, as after those things have failed me, then I reach out and I take that particular action. So, once again, it's just my observation in that political tool, used, and I personally am trying to be more cautious now of it, and I just wanted to kind of put it out there as well.
I mean, I think it's a fantastic question, as coming from an activist, like you said, if you're trying to move, that other community, then I think it's a really important question. In Alinsky style organizing, we call it cutting the issue, which you might have been training, or how do you cut the issue, which I think if we were just honest, we would say it was marketing. That's really what we're kind of doing, is how do we market this issue so that we can move the largest number of people to either vote for this piece of legislation or turn out in these different ways. I don't know how many of you are familiar with George Lakoff. He was an advisor for the Obama campaign, and he was all about this kind of thing. He said, don't call it entitlements, call it an earned benefit. Because as soon as you call it an entitlement, you play into the propaganda of the right. So he was always, he's about this sort of social psychology. So I think your question is spot on. We have a group in Evanston called Evanston for All that we formed after the election, and part of it is the solidarity response team, where we're training ourselves about how to deal with ICE raids and various issues in the communities that are targeted. But we also formed a group called Uniting Voices, where we're trying to reach across the divides of polarization, because we know it's not in the politicians' best interest or the media's best interest for citizens to come together and try to hash these out. We realized that we wanted to hold dialogues with conservatives. Well, guess what? Conservatives don't like that word. Like we learned, as soon as they hear dialogue, they think it's some lefty-loosey thing that they're not going to come to it. So once we did our research, we figured out they like the word debate. Well, we don't like the word debate. Well, no, that's not touchy-feely enough for us on the left, right? So we found this word conversation. And it's what you said, Maxwell. It's the same damn thing, really. I mean, it's not, it's what we're after. We just had to find the right way to cut the issue to bring people to the table. So whether it's what we're doing or what you're doing, I think it's the right question to continue to ask. But also, as you both pointed out, context is everything, right? What community are we trying to move, and who's going to hear it, and what integrity does it have? I think all those questions are obviously in play. Well, anyway, keep up the good work. Thank you. Good question.
We have time for one more question. I know we could probably do this all night long, but one more question. I think I saw someone over here.
Yeah.
Must be a burning question.
I just, I was wondering, picking up on Maxwell's question, whether you thought that the focus on guns, in particular in gun legislation, distracts from the root causes of the problem at all. Because what I'm hearing you say a little bit is that guns are a symptom and not the cause. And so sometimes I get worried that we're maybe not focusing on the right issue. Or is there a way to change language so that a part of our conversation on guns is also about solutions for the root causes of violence?
So I'm gonna let you kick that off, because I heard you when he was talking earlier along those lines saying that's genius.
I'm gonna, if I bite your stuff, don't say nothing, okay? It didn't come from you, it was mine.
We'll actually be working together soon.
Thank you, because I'm gonna definitely borrow that, thank you. I used to think that way. I did. When we first started MASC, I used to think that way. But I could not have more respect for my sister Maria and for Sarah and for what they do. Because what they do, it helps too. There are different levels to this. And everybody can't work on every level. And it's kind of like when I'm sitting out there on the corner on 75th and Stewart, there are a lot of people who are scared to come down there. And it's women from communities like this who aren't used to life on the South Side. And they can't come and make a dent the way that we have. They can't have the same relationship with the people in the community the way that we do. Everybody has to play their part. Gun violence is a huge, huge problem. It's huge. And for it to just be on one group of people to solve this whole problem would be completely unfair. And it would be insane. Everybody has a part to play in this. Everybody has a role. Everybody is important because the problem is so big and in so many different ways that it has to be tackled. Until we can stop the guns, we have to change how our kids see guns and what they use them for and why they use them. We have to attack all of these things. So everybody is important. And if we can't do what we do without what you do, you can't do what you do without what we do. So we really have to tackle this issue together.
Yeah, for me, I think about, from that question, I think about a campaign that we're working on around corner store intervention. We actually got a campaign that we're working with, really trying to take the corner stores and create alternative business models in the way they engage between predominantly African-American residents and Arab-run stores. And oftentimes people conflate all of the bad stuff because the corner stores are the intersection in our communities. They conflate all of the violence and bad stuff with the corner stores. But it wasn't until we started to humanize the corner store owner and bring him or her to the light and talking about this issue is when everybody started to understand that, oh, so it's not the corner store's fault that it's a food desert. Oh, it's not the corner store's fault that violence or the fact that there's dilapidation in these neighborhoods. And I think that once we begin to humanize the stories of those who've already begin to change their own narratives, who are working to add a center, to add a compass to their lives, and we begin to humanize that even more, I think people will be able to see the issue of violence a little bit differently. And they'll be able to conflate it with the larger structural piece and not just the simple fact that it's rooted to the point that people just have a gun and they use it, right? Pulling the trigger is so much more that goes into someone pulling the trigger of a gun. And if we don't begin to really create even more venues like this, where we're talking about the humanization of an issue, then when you start to put faces to it, and this is why in organizing, stories they matter most. We use stories as weapons because you don't understand an issue like immigration until you talk to that Latino grandmother, right, who's scared to death that her daughter or the Latino wife that's scared to death that her husband or son may not come home and they may be deported at any given time. And so that the issue becomes a lot more realer than a 5-second soundbite. When you hear, a mother screaming after she lost a child in the news, right? You don't know that 5-second soundbite until you begin to sit down and we create spaces where stories are being shared and we begin to humanize each other, and then we can begin to understand that the tactic of dividing us using issue areas is just a slick, propaganda tool that they constantly use to divide us all the time.
Yeah. I think I'm going to riff again off Maxwell's question as I respond to yours, because I think that phrase root causes is very telling, isn't it? Because I think what we're about tonight is not root causes, we're about root visions. Amen? And I hear that in what you just said, Tamar, and what you said, Shamar, about the humanization of one another and stories, and how you are calling for, recognizing the work that we all cooperate together. And we were talking about at our table in the small group thing about how we're constantly playing defense in this society right now. We're just reacting to these things that are coming at us. And we have so little time to vision together, to dream together, and to put out a specific, compelling vision that we think will be the best for the most amount of people. And I think that's why it's so important that this moment happens, as you just said, to have more of these moments. Because I'm interested in the root visions. And those powerful stories, and how we find the language to not divide ourselves, because as you just said, there's lots of people who just want to see us fighting amongst ourselves. So the root visions is I think what this event is about.
And on that note, I actually think that's a perfect segue to how we're going to close out the evening, which is we're going to invite a few folks out from organizations, including some of your organizations, to come up and briefly tell us about their organization and how you all could engage with that. So thank you all so much. Can we have one last hand for these speakers? And I'm actually going to invite folks we're going to sit down here this time to accommodate one of our speakers, so we're just going to pull up some extra chairs. If we're down here, can everybody see us okay? Is that all right? So if I can invite Pam Smith, Maria Pike, Shamar, you can join us in this if you also want to. Or do you have somebody else from Amman here? Oh, great, thank you. And Sarah. So, Pam, let's start with you. You work for an organization called Kenyan Nonviolence Training, is that right?
Yes, thank you. Yes, the organization is called the Addie Wyatt Center for Nonviolence Training, and we try to pass along Dr. King's philosophy and methodology of active nonviolence. Like how do we practice nonviolence, but in an active way, really confronting the issues that need to be confronted while holding out the vision for, as we all know, Dr. King referred to as the beloved community. So we work in schools, we work in communities, we've trained lots of young people at Kelly Library in Inglewood and in North Lawndale and other places. So.
Perfect, thank you. And Alia, could you tell us a little bit about your organization and what you do there?
Sure. So, Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all. My name is Alia Bilal. You have already heard a bit about my organization. I work for IMAN, the Inner City Muslim Action Network, which is where my colleague Shamar, who has absconded from the room, works for as well. And we are a nonprofit community organization based on the south side of Chicago. And we work to foster health, wellness, and healing in the inner city. And for us, that looks like direct service, it looks like community organizing, it looks like cultivating arts and culture in neighborhoods that scarcely get to see much, not only expression, not only hope and life, but have access to the avenues and the conversations around how they can actually make their lives and their communities better places. And so, we run a community health center, we do community organizing around issues like Shamar talked about in terms of food justice and access to healthy food. We work to bridge communities that have been pitted against each other for decades. We work to inspire people to reimagine, and as we like to say, to radically reimagine the world as it could be. And we do that with our brothers and sisters from all over the city, from all walks of life, from all backgrounds. If you're ready to work, we're ready to work with you.
Thank you. And Sarah, tell us a little bit about your organization.
Thank you. My name is Sarah Knieznik, and I'm an organizer with the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence. 2.5 years ago, ICHV, my employer, started something called the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. Until just the last 6 months, that organization was growing steadily, but in the last 6 months it has really just taken off like a rocket. The Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition 6 months ago consisted of about 90 rather small organizations throughout Chicagoland that are interested in working together to reduce gun violence through gun safety legislation. In the last 6 months, we've taken that from a membership of 25,000 statewide to a membership of over 175,000. And that has been possible because of the extraordinary interest in people like you who've come out tonight, people who are interested in making their voices heard among their elected officials. And we're really excited because we're getting stronger every day. And our goal is to advance gun safety legislation in Illinois to reduce gun violence, which I think I'll speak a little bit more about our current initiative in a moment. Thank you.
And Maria, you're from an organization we've already heard a little bit about, but you're also from another organization called Moms Demand Action. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, well, I'm going to be short on Moms Demand Action. I'm a member of the Survivor Network. That means that we are, our children were killed, and we now are working alongside organizations like the Illinois Handgun against
Illinois
Council Against Handgun Violence. But we all, I am a member of MASC, and MASC is very dear to my heart because it actually is very grassroots. We have been working for the last 3 years on 75th and Stewart. The plans we also have the drawings for the next micro center that is going to be helping the community. So it's a great idea, and I hope it gets copied across the city eventually, in which we're going to be actually helping with STEM classes, with all kinds of help for the kids and the adults as well in the immediate community. We have been very blessed because we have received, through Tamar's efforts mostly, we have received so much help from across the city and all from suburbs and even from out of state. And that is almost a miracle because the neighborhoods don't tend to come to see what the other neighbors are doing, and they stay on their silos. And we have had so much generosity come our way to this corner on 75th and Stewart, where we basically fried for the first 2 years with the deep sun, and everybody was like almost fainting by the end of the day. But right now, while we're waiting to build the micro center, we have this issue of the 4 schools closings. The last 4 schools was before they closed 5, right? In Englewood, which is a huge injustice. And when we're talking about gun violence, the root causes of violence, we also have to talk about unfairness in the system. And part of this unfairness is the lack of education, poor education, the food deserts, the housing insecurity, and all these things that exist in these kind of areas. So what is it going to be? How can we help each other at this point? It's going to be, there's nothing this is my personal opinion. I don't think there's much that I can do to stop those schools foreclosing, But what we can do. What we can do. Right.
What we can do
yes,
is we can actually help alleviate the disenfranchisement of these 437 students that are going to be basically bussed out of the community, and they are not going to be allowed to come to the new school, state-of-the-art school that is being built in the community. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to try to get the funds necessary to give them what they haven't had in the last 3 or 4 years,
because of the situation with the charter schools. You know, when you have a school, a public school that actually has 13 charter schools around it, and you're asking yourself, why is it that they have a 10% population, you should understand that the charter schools are depleting the funds that should be allocated to the Chicago public school system. And we are actually depriving the most at risk of our children the education that they badly need. They are going to be, these 437 kids that are being disenfranchised will likely, they are very much at risk of falling through the cracks, of getting into, you know, the underground economy, you know what I mean? And they're very likely that some of them are going to end up in jail. And you ask, and when people say, you know, these kids, you know, are disposable because they are bad kids, they're not bad kids. It's the things that we do to them. It's the things that we as adults should be taking care of for them. So,
Maria, with the things that we should be taking care of and the things that we should be doing,
yes.
With the work you're doing, whether it be on the schools or on the work you're doing on the corner with masks, you have a room full of people here who showed up on a frigid cold night, so clearly care about this issue.
Yeah.
If they want to be involved in your organization, what's a way that they could engage with you or a way that they could help?
Okay, every single summer, we have, we would like you to come to the block and help. You could come and, you know, serve the kids. You could donate. We have a website where, you know, you can sign up and come. Any kind of effort that you can do, you could actually, within your faith communities, you could organize to help us in the issues that, for instance, they don't have, these schools at this moment, they don't have football teams, basketball teams, they don't have arts, they don't even have some classes because teachers don't want to start working in a school that is about to close. So if you have time and you are a former teacher or a teacher that has free time, you are more than welcome to come and help our community. So there are many, many ways where you can help us. The need is there, and we're going to be needing a lot of it. Like for instance, there is a group that is trying to organize 100 students in sports, and one of them called and said, you know, is there a way that we can get CTA bus tickets? You know those cards. So there is a lot of need. If you would like to know more about it, we have these little pages, and then just contact us. And there's a lot of things that you can do. You can use 10 minutes of your time during the week, or 4 hours of your time, or 2 days, or whatever you want. It is just that get involved. How we're going to fix our communities is by each one of us getting involved in one way or another.
So that's a great picture. There's information there on the sheet she can hand out. I'm going to move it along so we can hear from the other groups really quickly.
Here's a sign-up sheet.
And there's a sign-up sheet over there that you can get to. Quickly, because we do need to clear out the room soon. Sarah, tell me about how folks could get involved in your organization, what they could do if they wanted to take action.
Thank you, I'd really like to do that. So one of my responsibilities at the Illinois Council Against Handgun Violence and the Gun Violence Prevention Coalition is to help support the passage of Senate Bill 1657, gun dealer licensing. The purpose of the bill is to make sure that gun dealers in Illinois are following safe business practices, responsible business practices, and making sure that guns do not end up in the hands of people who should not have them. There are details on this fact sheet about the bill. I'm not going to go into the details because I know we don't have much time. On the back is a partial list of the members of the Illinois Gun Violence Prevention Coalition. These are member organizations. If you are affiliated with any organization and are interested in joining, there is no cost, and my job is to make it easy for you and your members to get involved in getting gun safety legislation passed in Illinois. I'm also a big believer in the idea that coalitions are only meaningful if the relationships are two-way. So I work very hard trying to support the missions and goals of our member organizations, and as well as asking them to support our mission and goal. So I also have a business card on the table if anybody would like to join the coalition as an individual, or if any organization that you belong to might be interested in joining, I would appreciate it if you would contact me. The legislation that we're focusing on right now, as I mentioned moment ago is the Senate Bill 1657, gun dealer licensing. It passed the Illinois Senate in April of 2017 with bipartisan support. It passed with 30 votes. It needed 30 votes to pass, and the 30th vote was cast by a Republican lawmaker who 1 week before publicly swore that he would never vote for it. On the day of the vote, he changed his mind, and that afternoon wrote an open letter and published it in newspapers across Illinois, stating, "I do not like this bill. I did not want to vote for it, but I heard from so many of my constituents asking me to vote for it that I felt I had no choice."
Thank you.
I'm sorry. I'll try to wrap up. The reason I tell that story is because what we need is for people to pressure their legislators their Illinois House representatives to vote for the bill. It will be voted on in April or May. There's an action sheet on your table. There are 3 steps here. The first one explains how you can find out who your Illinois House rep is. And on the right is a box with a script in it. All you need to do is call and read that script, and it would really help us get the bill passed. Finally, there's a petition. There is a petition on your table. This is going to go to Governor Rauner. After we pass the bill out of the Illinois House, we're going to submit 20,000 signatures to Governor Rauner, asking him to please not veto the bill. If you could please take one of these petitions home, get 10 people to sign it, and mail it to us at the address at the bottom of the page, it would really help. I happened to run into Governor Rauner in a bar in Springfield in November, and I asked him, "Governor, when we pass Senate Bill 1657 out of the House, will you please not veto it?" He said, "Well, I'll think about it." So please, let's give him something to think about. Fill out the petition and mail it to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. And could you tell us, if people want to be involved in Amman, what are some actions they can take to learn more about your group?
Yeah, so I'll be brief with one invitation to you. We have an event that we hold every Tuesday evening called Grassroots Power Hour. And that is an opportunity to do a little more of what Shamar talked about and what I think a lot of us have talked about. We believe in the power of relationships to really move communities and move our society forward. And without that, coalitions, alliances crumble, because at the end of the day, it's not about the issues, it's about the people behind those issues. And so Grassroots Power Hour is an opportunity for our community, our leaders to get together, to continue to build relationships with each other, to be trained every week in the ways to build power and trained on some of the issues that we're working on. It's a great opportunity for you to come to learn a little bit more about all of the ways that we are trying to reduce violence, that we are trying to foster health, wellness, and healing in the inner city and beyond, and an opportunity for you to meet others that are doing that work and then be mobilized yourself to be involved in it. So I invite you, I'll put the flyers, we'll pass out the flyers on the table, 5:30 every Tuesday, and 5:30 is dinner, and then 6 to 7 p.m. is a brief 1-hour program.
Okay, 5:30 is Tuesday, flyers on the table. And Sarah, tell us about, Pam, tell us about how people might be involved in the trainings that you do and your organization in general.
Well, thank you. Well, everyone can think about whether they'd like to have the training for themselves. It involves learning the 6 steps of Kingian nonviolence and the 6 principles, which is the moral foundation. But I'd really love for people to think about what young people you think might be interested. When this curriculum was introduced at North Lawndale College Prep, violence in the school fell 90% within the first 2 years, and it has been sustained over 7 years. So it's a powerful methodology that young people take on themselves, and even when really challenged. I mean, I was co-training, we co-train with young people who are trainers as well. And a student came up to me during the break and said, I just had a really hard time. His house was shot up. And he still showed up at training the next day to pass this methodology on to, other people. And then not too long after that, he himself was shot. And, he's still coming to training, and he's like, I'm not going to retaliate. His biggest concern is how is he going to stop his family members from retaliating? because he said, I'm not going to let anybody knock me off my square, you know, is how he put it. So, you know, I think the power for transforming schools and communities and individuals, you know, adopting nonviolence as a way of life is really powerful. So, if you know of young people, there are cards on the table in our flyers. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for taking some time to come out with us. I'm going to hand the mic over to Danaz to close out the night.
Wow, what an amazing evening. And I really need to say thank you to everyone, especially on this very cold evening, to come out. And a lot of you drove very far distances. A lot of you drove very short distances, but you still came out into the cold. Really appreciate it. And I think it shows the power of stories. And this was not strategically placed, but choosing Shannon from WBEZ, which is so based in stories and how stories create connections and shared stories build relationships, and that's what we really learned today, the power of stories and how it doesn't matter if you're from one area or the other area, but just sitting together at the table, sharing stories about similar experiences we had, sharing stories about our faith. And I wish media would represent that more in what's portrayed on our television on Nonstop. The powerful connections that we just made tonight was hopefully something you'll walk away and share with, you know, when you go back to work tomorrow, when you are in your house of worship. And also getting out of your comfort level. I always think about that. When I went to give work with Tamar about 1.5 years with my 16-year-old son, I was kind of scared standing there in that corner. I was like, gonna be honest with you, I was like, oh my God. My husband said I was crazy, and he said, if anything happens to you, just come home with the son. I don't care if you come home, but make sure my son comes home. And I was like, oh God, if anything happens, let it happen to me, not my son. But, you know, I was really uncomfortable, and all of us, we need to be uncomfortable to make changes. So please make sure you do things out of your comfort zone, because that's what makes it a better world, and that's what makes us better people. So choose one thing that's uncomfortable for you and go ahead and challenge yourself. We're going to end off with a prayer that Pastor Roon's going to help us move the night along with. Thank you.
Thank you, Dilnaz. I don't know if this will get you out of your comfort zone, but I've asked you to rise as you're able, and let's form a big circle together as we can around these circular tables. As we form the circle, I want to give thanks and praise to two of my favorite readings. One is from the Pirkei Avot from the Jewish tradition, and I think Tamara, you actually referenced it somewhat in your speech. You're not required to finish the work, but neither are you allowed to abstain from it. Amen? And I heard an echo of that when you were speaking so powerfully to us. I hear both grace and challenge in that, you know, and that's what I think we need, is the balance to continue our work together. And from the Quran, one of my favorite passages, and I apologize for the English understanding of it, but as I remember it, it was that, you know, God could have made you one human community, but instead you were made into different tribes and peoples so that you might compete with one another for good works. And what an evocative concept. And then I think the end of the reading says something, and at the end, you know, God will show you what this all means. And I'm thinking about, Shamar, what you said in our small group about how people are just desperate for a space to be loved and desperate for a space to be understood. And in my tradition, a not often quoted passage of scripture from Jesus is, why don't you decide for yourselves what is right? And here we have a moment to do that together, given everything we've heard and shared. And so if you are from a faith tradition, or you're not, I think it would be good for us to have a moment of silence together and give thanks for this space. And also, in my tradition, we talk a lot about conversion, but I've never experienced it as a one-time thing. I think there are many moments of conversion in our lives. And I pray that this moment right now is a moment of conversion for all of us in the words that Dilnaz just spoke and everyone that we've heard, that we find the space in our silence to be converted to this work together. So let's just observe a moment of silence together. Shalom, assalamu alaikum, peace be with you.
Here's the surveys, if you don't mind filling out the surveys, and if you don't mind